Okay, hi, my name's Emily and my talk this week is on grades. So in my talk I'm just going to talk through the initial purpose of grades and their intentions, the incentive behind grades, why is it that we strive for high grades and don't necessarily achieve them all the time, and the motivations for wanting these high grades, and also what is wrong with grading and why they may be a hindrance and get in the way of creativity. And then I'll conclude. So to start off, the initial purpose of grading is obviously to assess individual achievement. It's kind of been implemented as the standard measurement tool for personal growth, so comparing your personal growth and the comparison of you and peers. So like with standard tests, you can compare different countries, you can compare league tables within different schools and things like that. The other intention of grades is also kind of a currency, because obviously you need to achieve the high grades to get a good job for employment, to go on to do further education. And I'll just touch on this now. I haven't really discussed this in my blog, but I think it might be something quite interesting to look at in the future, is that these are actually getting raised all the time. When I was at school, A-levels never used to have A-stars, and now they've implemented A-stars into A-levels, so they just seem to be increasing the thresholds further and further as people are learning more, so that might be an interesting point to make in a further blog. And also, I'm going to look at the incentive behind grades and behaviour, and whether grades do affect behaviour for good or for bad, or they don't really do anything. So from what I've said, you kind of assume that there's a negative correlation between grades and high studying behaviours. So if you achieve a high grade, you kind of presume that if you achieved a high grade, you might study harder because you know that you've achieved it and that you want to keep achieving high, or you might not maybe put it in as much effort because you've already attained the high grade, so you just think, oh well, that's easy, I can go with that. Or if you're doing badly, say if you don't get the high grades that you think you deserve, then you might try a little bit harder. But actually, Burney in 1964 found this not strictly to be the truth. Through questionnaires and interviews, he actually found that grades and the amount of study put in are actually contingent on the value of the course held by different students. So if they value a course high, they like the course and they find it interesting intrinsically, then they'll actually value a higher grade, obtaining a higher grade. They'll be more proud of what they've achieved. Whereas if they don't necessarily value a course as high, they don't think it's necessarily as important, they don't think that grade really matters so much, which kind of follows the behaviourism in a way, because learning is learnt through the antecedents of new behaviour, including the consequences of previous behaviour. So if you if your behaviour is that you don't study so much because you're not interested in the subject, then your consequence is going to be that you get a lower grade. Well, if you're not really that bothered about getting a lower grade, the next time you're not really going to try that hard because there's a low held value to the course or the module that you're taking part in. Whereas if you're really like, if you really interested in the course and then you put in a lot of studying behaviour because you want to do well, and then you come out with a high grade, that teaches you that next time you actually want to study harder because you're going to get that high grade. And so from this I kind of wanted to look at the motivations behind studying and getting high grades. So basically, how are we motivated to achieve high or low grades? So the first one that I looked at was the self-concept of ability, which actually there's a lot of studies out there on. Eccles in 1989 found that 6th and 7th grade children rated self-concept of ability in parallel with the importance of the subject, so it's kind of gone along what I've said before. So basically, if they're good at a subject, then they hold it of higher value, which then goes back into a circle because they're getting higher grades, so then they're motivated to then keep trying. But because they think that they're good at a subject or think that they have the ability to do it, it actually intrinsically motivates them further, so they're more empowered to try harder, which I thought was really interesting. So I mean, I didn't really find any information on this as of yet, but I thought it might be quite interesting to see what the teachers are doing to motivate their children, maybe because that all comes along with positive reinforcement. If the children are receiving positive reinforcement in the classroom, they might think that they're good at a subject, which means they're going to try harder, which then has this effect on their grades, which may not be the be-all and end-all, but for our society, which is now, grades are of importance. Then Eccles actually went on with Wigfield in 2000 and came up with the expectancy value model, and they found that predicting grades from ability beliefs was actually a very good close correlation predictor of the actual grades that they received. So children said, I don't think that I'm very good at this subject, therefore the effort wasn't really put in, and therefore they could predict that actually the children weren't going to do very well in that subject because they weren't putting in the motivation to do so. Interestingly enough, Marcus and Kitayama in 1991 did a study that looked at different cultures. They looked at American culture and Asian culture, and they found that in American culture students are more likely to be motivated to express their inner attributes, so they're going to look for things that they're more interested in, that they are intrinsically motivated to do. Whereas in Asian culture, more students are motivated to fit in with peer strengths and like what the classroom is focused on at the time. So I found that quite interesting in the fact that this might actually be more true for American cultures and maybe not for Asian cultures. The second motivation that I looked at was peer influence, and Coleman found that adolescents are actually more influenced by peers than parents nowadays, and that's kind of getting stronger from the studies that I found. And because most education is actually learned by surrounded by peers in the classroom, I thought this would probably most likely have a big effect on their education and their motivation to achieve high grades. So Shunk, Hansen and Cox in 1987 found that when 10-year-olds observed same-sex peers completing maths problems, they actually tended to judge themselves along the same ability, regardless of what ability they actually held and what grades they were receiving, and regardless of skill. And watching these children complete the maths problems, when these children that were observing actually completed the maths problems themselves, it actually led to a higher efficiency, having watched these children, whether they were completing these maths problems in the correct way or not, which I thought was quite interesting. So watching them helped them. And kind of the social learning theory follows this, because it's the peers watching their other peers that was helping them along. And furthermore, Slavin in 1983 found that provided group rewards and individual accountability was provided, cooperative group learning actually has a very positive effect on grades compared to control groups where people were working individually. So maybe it was that discussion among peers that kind of motivated them to actually think about what they were writing and achieve a better result for it. So that's kind of like positive peer pressure in a way, so it can be very effective, and I don't think all peer pressure is bad. So then I kind of wanted to look at, there's a lot of literature obviously on why grades are bad and what influence that has on children. My blog was getting quite lengthy, so I didn't have time to discuss the positives of grades, which is probably what I'll go and do on my next blog. So these are just a few points on the negative effects of grades for now. My first point is that grades tend to diminish students' interest in whatever they're learning, and I definitely think this is true. I remember when I was like 15 years old and our teachers already were pushing us to apply for university regardless of what we were kind of telling them we wanted to do. We were provided with counsellors that would kind of talk us through what our future goals were and things like that, but I found that more than 90% of the time they were like, well, you can do this course at university, and then sort of forget about it and you were set. And I think you pronounce it Kerr, in 2001, found that the need for a degree was so high, and the title actually was more greatly held upon than the information learned. So students actually, they thought, oh, if I get my BSc or my BA, then I'm sorted for life. It doesn't actually matter what degree course I do anymore. As long as I have a degree under my belt, then I'm set. Which is kind of like, surely you should be going to learn the information in my mind. But then that kind of works for me because I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do. I did have a slight interest in psychology, and here I am. And now, you know, learning about these things, I think it's great. But at the time, maybe I did kind of follow the sheep a little bit and kind of go along with that. So, secondly, grades create a preference for the easiest possible task. obviously we all came to university in first year, and kind of the general talk was, oh, you just need 40% to get through to the next one, you know, it's fine, we can do that, as long as I get 40%, that's absolutely fine. So I think university students, more often than not, you do get dropouts, but the ones that do get through, you might not push yourself as much if you're not necessarily interested in the subject that you've applied for, maybe as others. But obviously, like we were told in our first couple of lectures, and Mackenzie and Schweizer also found in 2001, that your first grade is actually a predictor of your overall university achievement, so maybe students should bear that in mind when they're thinking, oh, I just scraped through. And the last one is grades tend to reduce the quality of students' thinking. I definitely think that there's no room for creativity if you've got grades on your mind all the time, because you're just concentrating on getting that high grade, maybe you're not putting the effort in. I think this module is an exception because you need to be able to explore and broaden your mind to all the different things to be able to get the grade. So I do think it's possible, but I just don't think that it's being implemented. And Grolnick and Ryan in 1987 actually found through two different groups, they presented two different groups of students with a passage, and one group was told that they'd be graded on what they learnt from the passage, and the other group was told that no grades would be involved, they just had to read the passage. And the group that told they would be graded actually had more trouble understanding the main point of the text than if they were told that they wouldn't be graded, which I thought was really interesting. And also, they tested them in a week's time to see how much they could recall, and the non-graded group could actually recall a lot more than the graded group because they hadn't sort of used rote memory learning, from which is what I took it as. So to conclude, I think that grading obviously has a huge impact on intrinsic motivation, and I think that the two of them can be combined sort of to work together, and I'm going to be quite interested in exploring the positives of grading in my further blog, because I don't think that I've touched on that enough yet to really understand the whole concept properly. And obviously there's a lot of factors affecting it. I think that behaviourism can have the personal motivation for getting high grades can be followed by behaviourism, and peer influence can be followed by the social learning theory a lot, and I think that can be used positively in the classroom as well. And it's clear that handing out grades squashes our interest and perhaps broader thinking and maybe creativity, but obviously, like I said before, I need to research this a bit more thoroughly, but that's the research that I've found so far. So thanks for listening, and do you have any questions? I personally think that there's different forms of grading, and from what I've come across in my research, I don't think that a straight A, B, C grade really covers your learning. I don't think that's an appropriate way to grade, in my personal view. Like I said, I need to do a little bit more research on it, but I think that there's different ways of measuring progress, and I think that it should be kind of seen more as an individual, because everyone is individual. And yeah, obviously we need we need to measure the country as a whole just to see how we're doing and things like that. But I think there's different ways that it can be done, and I think that it's a little bit too rounded in the fact that maths, science, English is just a focus and that's it. So I think for anybody, no matter what background they come from, I think that things can be changed in the way that we're graded and looked at. Does that kind of answer your question? Anyone else?